There is something you need to know about the person your heart keeps returning to. Something they have been hiding. Something they never imagined they would have the courage to face. Your soulmate is already married. That truth may feel heavy. It may make your mind race with questions. You may wonder whether everything you felt was wrong, whether the connection was only in your imagination, or whether you were meant to walk away before your heart became even more involved. But this story is not as simple as it appears. Because what they did next changed everything. The person you love has been living two different lives. There is the life everyone can see. The marriage. The responsibilities. The photographs. The routines. The version of them that smiles when people are watching and says everything is fine whenever someone asks. And then there is the life hidden beneath all of that. The life where they think about you. The life where your name enters their mind at the most unexpected moments. The life where they compare every conversation to the ones they had with you. They never planned for this to happen. They did not wake up one day and decide to become emotionally connected to someone outside their marriage. They did not expect you to appear at a time when their life was already complicated. But some connections arrive without asking whether the timing is convenient. You entered their life quietly. At first, they tried to treat you like everyone else. They told themselves that the interest would pass. They tried to keep every interaction ordinary, every conversation controlled, and every emotion hidden behind politeness. But something about you made ordinary impossible. You saw parts of them that even the person they married had stopped noticing. You noticed when their smile was forced. You sensed when something was wrong before they explained it. You listened to them without trying to correct, judge, or control what they felt. And that frightened them. Because being seen by you reminded them how long they had felt invisible. Their marriage may look stable from the outside, but inside that relationship, something has been missing for a long time. The conversations became practical. The affection became routine. The emotional distance grew so slowly that neither of them recognized it at first. They continued living together. They continued completing responsibilities. They continued appearing like a couple. But they stopped feeling like two people who truly knew one another. Your soulmate tried to ignore that emptiness. They told themselves that every marriage becomes quiet eventually. They believed they should be grateful for what they had. They thought wanting emotional closeness meant they were selfish or unrealistic. So they remained silent. They accepted the loneliness. They convinced themselves that this was simply what adulthood looked like. Then they met you. And suddenly, they remembered what it felt like to be emotionally awake. A conversation with you could stay in their mind for hours. A simple message from you could change the energy of their entire day. When you laughed, they felt lighter. When you became distant, they noticed immediately. They began waiting for your presence. That was when fear entered. They knew they were married. They knew there were boundaries that should not be crossed. They knew that whatever was growing between you could hurt many people if it was handled carelessly. So they tried to pull away. Perhaps you noticed. One day they were warm, open, and emotionally present. The next day they seemed distant, guarded, or unusually formal. You may have wondered what you did wrong. You may have questioned whether they had lost interest. But their distance had nothing to do with a lack of feeling. They pulled away because the feeling had become too real. Every time they tried to create space, they felt the loss of you. They would tell themselves not to reach out, then spend the entire day hoping you would contact them first. They would promise themselves they would stop thinking about you, only to find your memory appearing in quiet moments. They would focus on their marriage, their home, and their responsibilities, but a painful question kept returning. Why do I feel more understood by someone I cannot have than by the person I chose? That question became impossible to silence. At first, they blamed themselves. They believed something must be wrong with them. They tried to become more attentive in their marriage. They planned conversations. They made efforts to restore the closeness that had disappeared. For a while, they hoped the problem could be fixed. But every attempt revealed something deeper. The marriage had not become empty because of you. You had simply made them aware of an emptiness that had existed long before you arrived. This realization shook them. It meant you were not the cause. You were the mirror. Through you, they saw everything they had been avoiding. They saw how unhappy they had become. They saw how often they silenced their own needs. They saw that they had spent years choosing comfort over honesty. And then something happened that changed the direction of their life. One night, they went home after speaking with you. Their spouse was sitting in the same place as always. The television was playing. The room looked familiar. Nothing had visibly changed. But your soulmate felt like a stranger inside their own home. They sat down and looked around at the life they had built. The photographs on the wall. The furniture they had chosen together. The objects collected over the years. Everything was evidence of a shared history. But history and love are not always the same thing. They realized they had been staying because of time. Because of expectations. Because leaving would be difficult. Because they were afraid of becoming the person everyone blamed. They were not staying because their heart felt at home. And in that moment, they made a decision. Not to run to you. Not to begin a secret relationship. Not to continue living two emotional lives. They decided to tell the truth. That is what they did next. They turned off the television. Their spouse looked at them, confused by the sudden silence. Your soulmate's hands began trembling. Their throat tightened. Every instinct told them to delay the conversation, to wait for a better day, to avoid destroying the fragile peace of the evening. But they understood that another delay would become another year. So they spoke. They said, "I am not happy." 4 words. Simple words. But once they were spoken, the entire room changed. Their spouse did not respond immediately. Perhaps they had expected an argument about responsibilities, money, or family. They were not prepared to hear that the foundation of the marriage had become uncertain. Your soulmate continued. They said they had been emotionally absent for a long time. They admitted that they had been pretending. They explained that the relationship had become a place of obligation instead of connection. And then came the part they were most afraid to reveal. They said there was someone else. Not physically. Not in the way their spouse first imagined. But emotionally. They admitted that another person had awakened something inside them. They did not speak your name immediately. They could not. Your name felt too sacred and too dangerous in that moment. Their spouse stood up. Questions came quickly. Who is it? How long has this been happening? Have you betrayed me? Your soulmate could hear the pain beneath every question. And they knew they had caused part of it. They did not defend themselves. They did not blame the marriage entirely. They did not say that meeting you gave them permission to hurt anyone. They simply told the truth. They said, I have not crossed the line physically, but my heart is no longer where it used to be. That sentence broke something open. Their spouse began crying. Your soulmate wanted to take back every word. For one moment, they almost did. They almost said they were confused. They almost promised to forget everything and return to the life they had been living. But they knew that would only create another lie. So they stayed in the discomfort. They allowed the truth to remain in the room. Their spouse asked whether they loved you. This was the question they had avoided even inside their own mind. They lowered their eyes. Silence answered before they did. And then they finally said it. Yes. They love you. Not because you are new. Not because you are exciting. Not because life with you would necessarily be easier. They love you because something in them feels recognized by you. They love you because they do not have to become smaller in your presence. They love you because you remind them of who they were before fear, duty, and disappointment changed them. But even after admitting that, they did not leave immediately. This may surprise you. Part of you may wonder why they did not walk out that night and come directly to you. But your soulmate understood that ending a marriage is not a dramatic scene from a film. There are lives connected to it. There may be children. There may be shared finances. There may be families who will be affected. There may be years of promises, pain, and memories that cannot be packed into one suitcase. They knew they had to act carefully. They did not want to turn you into the reason for a reckless escape. They wanted to take responsibility for the life they had created. So they made another decision. They told their spouse they needed time apart. Not to begin something secret with you. Not to enjoy freedom without consequences. They needed time to understand whether the marriage could be repaired honestly or whether it had already ended emotionally. Their spouse accused them of choosing you. But your soulmate said something unexpected. They said, I am choosing the truth. That was the real decision. For years, they had chosen appearances. They had chosen silence. They had chosen to remain in a situation that felt empty because they were afraid of judgment. Now they were finally choosing honesty, even though honesty might cost them everything familiar. The days after that conversation were painful. They slept in another room. They avoided questions from relatives. They continued going to work as if their entire life had not been shaken. And through all of it, they wanted to contact you. They wanted to tell you what had happened. They wanted to say that the truth was finally out. But they stopped themselves. They did not want to place the weight of their marriage on your shoulders. They knew you had not asked them to destroy anything. They knew you may not even understand how deeply they felt. Perhaps you had been trying to move on. Perhaps you had already decided that loving someone unavailable was too painful. Your soulmate thought about that possibility every night. They wondered whether they were making changes too late. They wondered whether you would believe that their decision had nothing to do with temporary emotion. So they began doing something you never expected. They started therapy. For the first time, they sat in front of someone and spoke honestly about their marriage, their fears, and their feelings for you. They explained how they had spent years avoiding conflict. They admitted that they often stayed in situations because disappointing others felt more terrifying than disappointing themselves. They talked about the moment they met you. They talked about how alive they felt. But their therapist asked a question that stopped them. If this person disappeared tomorrow, would you still know your marriage was unhappy? Your soulmate sat in silence. They imagined a life where you never spoke to them again. The thought was painful. But beneath that pain, the answer was clear. Yes. Even without you, the marriage was no longer true. That answer changed everything. It meant they were not leaving only to chase you. They were leaving because they could no longer continue betraying themselves. You had awakened the truth, but the truth belonged to them. They needed to choose an honest life whether or not you were waiting at the end of it. That was the most mature decision they had ever made. They began speaking more openly with their spouse. Some conversations became angry. Some became quiet. Some ended with both of them remembering happier years and wondering where everything had changed. There were moments when guilt almost convinced your soulmate to stay. Their spouse reminded them of the past. The sacrifices. The promises. The people who would be disappointed. Your soulmate felt the weight of it all. But guilt is not the same as love. They were beginning to understand that staying out of guilt would eventually hurt both of them more. Their spouse deserved to be loved by someone fully present. Your soulmate deserved a life where honesty did not feel like betrayal. And you deserved not to be held inside a secret forever. Then one evening, their spouse said something no one expected. They said, "I have known for a long time that you were unhappy." Your soulmate looked up in shock. Their spouse admitted they had felt the distance too. They had noticed the silence. They had known something essential was missing but had also been afraid to say it. In that moment, the story changed. For the first time, they were not enemies. They were two people admitting that a relationship had ended emotionally before either of them had the courage to acknowledge it. Their spouse asked about you again. This time, there was less anger in the question. What is so different about them? Your soulmate did not speak about your appearance. They did not describe your achievements. They said, "They make me feel honest." That was the answer. With you, they cannot pretend. Your presence brings hidden feelings to the surface. Your questions make them examine the life they are living. Your energy reminds them that love should feel awake, not merely safe. Their spouse listened. Then they said something that shocked your soulmate. Maybe you met them because you were finally ready to stop lying to yourself. There was sadness in those words. But there was also acceptance. Not complete acceptance. Not peace. That would take time. But it was the beginning of a different kind of ending. An ending without revenge. An ending built on the recognition that forcing love cannot restore it. Your soulmate cried that night. Not only because the marriage was ending. They cried for the years both of them had lost pretending everything was fine. They cried because honesty had arrived so late. And they cried because they did not know whether you would still be there. Several days passed. They picked up their phone many times. They opened your conversation. They stared at your name. They wrote, "I need to tell you something." Then they deleted it. They did not want to contact you until they were certain that they were acting from truth, not emotional chaos. They wanted to come to you as someone who had taken responsibility. Not as someone asking you to rescue them. So they waited until the separation was real. Until the conversations had happened. Until the practical steps had begun. Until they could look at themselves and know they were not offering you a hidden place in their life. They were preparing to offer you an honest one. Then, late one night, they wrote the message again. This time, they did not delete it. They said, "There is something I should have told you a long time ago. My life is changing, and you are part of the reason I finally had the courage to face the truth. I am not asking you for an answer. I am only asking you to hear me." Their finger hovered over the send button. Their heart was pounding. They knew that once they sent it, they could no longer control what happened next. You could ignore them. You could tell them it was too late. You could say that you never wanted to become involved in something so complicated. They were prepared for all of those possibilities. But they were no longer prepared to remain silent. So they pressed send. That is what they did next. They told the truth at home. They faced the consequences. They began ending a life built on emotional dishonesty. And then they reached out to you, not with a secret invitation, but with an honest confession. They are not expecting you to celebrate. They know the situation is painful. They know trust must be earned. They know that love does not erase responsibility. But they want you to understand this. They did not ask you to become their hidden escape. They changed their life because meeting you showed them that they could no longer survive without truth. And now they are waiting. Not for you to save them. Not for you to promise a future. They are waiting to know whether you will read their message. Whether you will allow one conversation. Whether you will hear everything they have been too afraid to say. Because there is still one truth they have not revealed. Something they discovered during the final conversation with their spouse. Something about you. Something that made them realize your connection may have begun much earlier than either of you understands. And when you learn what it is, you may question everything you believed about how the two of you first met. The message reached you at a moment when you were not prepared for it. Perhaps you had just started accepting the silence. Perhaps you had convinced yourself that whatever existed between you and this person was never going to become clear. You may have stopped checking your phone so often. You may have stopped imagining the conversation you wished they would finally have with you. Then their name appeared. For a few seconds, you simply stared at it. Your heart recognized the importance of the message before your mind understood the words. Something in you became still. All the emotions you had tried to bury began rising at once. Hope, fear, anger, curiosity. And beneath all of them, the feeling you had never completely managed to release. You opened the message. They told you that their life was changing. They admitted that meeting you had forced them to confront truths they had avoided for years. They explained that they had finally spoken honestly inside their marriage. They said they were not asking you to become involved in secrecy, confusion, or betrayal. They only wanted you to know what had happened. But as you continued reading, one sentence stopped you. There is something about our connection that I discovered during the final conversation with my spouse. I do not fully understand it yet, but I think you deserve to know. You read the sentence again. Then again. Your mind began searching for explanations. What could their spouse possibly know about you? What could have been discovered that connected you to a life you had never been part of? You wanted to respond immediately, but your hands did not move. Part of you was afraid that replying would reopen everything. You had worked hard to regain emotional control. You had tried to accept that this person was unavailable. You had reminded yourself that love alone was not enough to make a complicated situation healthy. And now they were saying the marriage was ending. Not because they wanted to escape consequences. Not because they expected you to rescue them. They were saying it because the truth could no longer remain hidden. Still, you needed more than emotional words. You needed facts. You needed to know whether they were truly separated or simply overwhelmed after one difficult conversation. You needed to know whether their decision would remain the same once guilt, family pressure, and fear became stronger. Most of all, you needed to know whether contacting you was an act of honesty or another form of emotional confusion. So you waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Your soulmate watched the screen from the other side, wondering whether you had read the message. They told themselves they had no right to expect a quick response. They knew they had brought a heavy truth into your life. But the silence was difficult. They imagined every possible reaction. Maybe you were angry. Maybe you felt betrayed because they had never explained the full situation before. Maybe you had already decided to walk away from any connection that required this much pain. They placed the phone down. Then picked it up again. They nearly sent another message, but stopped themselves. For once, they understood that giving someone the truth also meant giving them time to process it. So they waited. And during that waiting, they remembered the final conversation with their spouse. It had happened after most of the anger had settled. The house was unusually quiet. Boxes had not yet been packed. Nothing looked different. Yet both of them knew the life they had shared was beginning to separate into two paths. Their spouse sat across from them and asked to see a photograph of you. Your soulmate hesitated. They did not want to make you part of a painful confrontation. They did not want your face to become a symbol of blame. But their spouse said something unexpected. I do not want to judge them. I only want to know who made you realize you were unhappy. Slowly, your soulmate opened your photograph. Their spouse looked at it for several seconds. Then their expression changed. Not with anger. With recognition. Your soulmate noticed immediately. What is it? Their spouse did not answer at first. They looked closer at the photograph, as though trying to confirm a memory. Then they asked for your full name. When your soulmate spoke it, the color seemed to leave their spouse's face. That was the moment everything became even more complicated. Their spouse stood up, walked toward a cabinet, and began searching through old papers and photographs. They moved quickly, almost nervously, until they found a small envelope that looked as if it had not been touched in years. Inside was an old photograph. A group of people standing together at an event from long ago. Your soulmate did not understand what they were looking at. Then their spouse pointed to one of the faces. It was someone from your family. The discovery made no sense at first. Your soulmate asked how they knew this person. Their spouse explained that years ago, before the marriage, both families had briefly crossed paths through work, friendship, or a shared community. It had not been a close relationship, but something important had happened during that period. Something involving your soulmate. Their spouse had heard your name before. Not recently. Years ago. Long before you and your soulmate met. The idea felt impossible. Your soulmate sat down, trying to understand what this meant. Their spouse continued. There had once been a conversation between older family members about two people who might someday be introduced. It was not a formal arrangement. No promises were made. It was simply one of those discussions adults have when they notice that two families share similar values. Your name had been mentioned. Your soulmate's name had been mentioned. But the introduction never happened. Life moved in another direction. People lost contact. Years passed. Your soulmate eventually entered the marriage they were now leaving. And you continued along your own path, never knowing that at one point, before either of you had met, someone had imagined the possibility of bringing you together. Your soulmate could barely speak. They asked why no one had ever told them. Their spouse said they had only heard fragments of the story and had never considered it important. At the time, it seemed like nothing more than an old family conversation. But after seeing your photograph and hearing your full name, the memory returned. That was the secret your soulmate needed to share with you. Not because it proved that fate had decided everything. Not because an old conversation gave them permission to ignore the reality of the present. But because it made them question the strange familiarity they had always felt with you. From the beginning, something about you had felt known. Not familiar in a logical way. Familiar in the heart. They had often wondered why talking to you felt easier than it should. Why your presence seemed to awaken memories that did not belong to any specific moment. Why even during silence, the connection felt older than the actual time you had known one another. Now there was a small piece of history linking your families. A possibility that your paths had been moving near each other long before you finally met. When your soulmate revealed this to their spouse, the room became quiet again. Then their spouse said something that surprised them. Maybe some people keep crossing the same road until they are finally ready to recognize each other. There was no bitterness in the sentence. Only exhaustion and sadness. Your soulmate did not know how to respond. Part of them felt guilty for receiving a meaningful revelation during the ending of a marriage. Another part felt as if the universe had placed a mirror in front of them. The connection with you was not an excuse. It was a question. Would they continue choosing fear, appearances, and emotional dishonesty? Or would they finally become someone capable of building a truthful life? That night, they made another decision. Before asking anything from you, they would complete the separation respectfully. They would not rush into your life carrying unfinished responsibilities. They would not make promises while still standing between two worlds. They would handle the legal, emotional, and practical reality of ending the marriage. They knew this could take time. They knew there might be difficult conversations with families. There could be judgment. There could be financial complications. There could be moments when loneliness tempted them to reach for you before they were ready to offer stability. But they refused to turn you into an emotional hiding place. They wanted you to be a choice made in truth, not an escape from pain. That was why their first message did not contain declarations about forever. They did not ask you to wait. They did not ask you to promise anything. They simply gave you the truth and allowed you to decide what to do with it. Eventually, you replied. Your message was not long. I read everything. I need honesty, not only feelings. Tell me what is actually happening. When your soulmate saw those words, they felt relief and fear at the same time. Relief because you had not closed the door. Fear because the real conversation could no longer be avoided. They called you. For a moment, neither of you spoke. The silence was filled with everything that had happened before. Every unanswered question. Every moment of closeness. Every time one of you wanted to say more but chose caution. Then your soulmate said your name. The sound of it affected you more than you expected. Their voice was different. There was no playful distance. No attempt to hide behind ordinary conversation. They sounded tired. Honest. Vulnerable. They told you the marriage had been emotionally over for a long time. They explained the conversation, the separation, the therapy, and the practical steps they were beginning to take. You listened carefully. You did not interrupt when they became emotional. But you did not allow emotion to replace clarity. You asked the question they feared most. If I had never entered your life, would you still be leaving? They were quiet. Then they answered. Yes. They said meeting you did not destroy their marriage. It revealed that they had stopped being honest inside it. They admitted that if you disappeared, the pain would be enormous, but they would still continue the separation because returning to the old life would mean returning to a lie. That answer mattered. You needed to know they were not making you responsible for the end of their marriage. You needed to know they were capable of standing alone if necessary. Then you asked another question. What do you want from me now? Your soulmate took a slow breath. They wanted to say everything. They wanted to tell you that they imagined a future with you. That they had dreamed of waking beside you. That they believed this connection had followed them through years of missed timing. But they understood that desire was not the same as readiness. So they gave you the most responsible answer they could. I want the chance to tell you the truth. I want to become free honestly. I want to know whether there could be something between us when I am no longer asking you to enter a complicated situation. But I will not ask you to wait for me. Those words surprised you. Part of you had expected pressure. You expected them to say that love should be enough. You expected them to ask you to trust destiny, ignore the risks, and promise that everything would work out. Instead, they gave you freedom. They told you to continue living your life. They said they would understand if the situation was too painful. They admitted that even if you chose never to begin a relationship with them, they would still be grateful that meeting you had forced them to become honest. That was when your anger softened slightly. Not completely. You still remembered the uncertainty. You still knew that ending a marriage was serious and that people often made emotional promises during moments of crisis. But for the first time, they were not trying to hide the difficult parts. They were not presenting themselves as a victim. They accepted responsibility. They spoke about the pain their spouse was experiencing. They admitted that even a necessary ending could hurt innocent people. This was not a romantic fantasy to them. It was a real life being dismantled. And they were determined to move through it with as much integrity as possible. Then they told you about the photograph. About the old connection between the families. About the conversation that may have happened years before either of you knew. You listened in disbelief. At first, you thought they were trying to make the connection sound destined so you would become emotionally invested again. But they did not exaggerate. They admitted they did not know exactly what the story meant. They only knew the names and faces matched. They said they would show you the photograph when the time was right. You began remembering things from your own family. Fragments of conversations. A name you may have heard long ago. A time when an older relative mentioned someone you might have met under different circumstances. You had never paid attention. It seemed unimportant then. Now the memory felt different. But you refused to let coincidence make the decision for you. An old photograph could not guarantee a healthy relationship. A mysterious connection could not erase the need for trust, boundaries, and time. You told them that. They agreed. That agreement shocked you more than the story itself. The person who once avoided difficult truths was now allowing you to question everything. They were not asking you to romanticize their situation. They wanted you to see it clearly. Before ending the call, you set a boundary. You told them you could not become involved romantically while the marriage remained legally and emotionally unfinished. You said you would not participate in secrecy. You would not exchange promises in private while their spouse was still processing the separation. You would listen. You would remain honest. But you would not become part of a hidden relationship. Your soulmate accepted the boundary immediately. They said you were right. They admitted that hearing the boundary hurt, but it also made them respect you more. Because you were not taking advantage of their vulnerability. You were protecting everyone involved, including yourself. After the call, they sat alone in the darkness. For the first time, they understood that loving you would require patience. Not the passive waiting they had practiced before. A different kind of patience. The kind that takes responsibility. The kind that does not demand a reward for doing the right thing. The kind that allows another person to remain free. In the weeks that followed, your soulmate did something they had never done consistently before. They matched their words with actions. They attended therapy. They met with professionals to understand the separation process. They communicated clearly with their spouse. They did not hide the truth from close family members, even when the reactions became difficult. Some people blamed you without knowing you. Your soulmate refused to allow that. They told their family that the marriage had problems long before you appeared. They said you had never asked them to leave. They accepted full responsibility for their decisions. That moment mattered more than you knew. They could have used you as a simple explanation. They could have told everyone that love had swept them away and made them powerless. Instead, they protected your name. They said the choice belonged to them. Their spouse also began facing the truth in a different way. There were angry days. There were moments of grief. But slowly, both of them began recognizing that staying together would not restore what had been lost. Then another truth emerged. Their spouse had also been emotionally attached to someone from the past. They had never acted on it, but the connection had remained inside them for years. This confession changed the emotional balance of the separation. It did not erase the pain. But it revealed that both of them had been living incomplete emotional lives. Both had remained because leaving felt too frightening. Both had mistaken endurance for commitment. For the first time, the end of the marriage began feeling less like a betrayal and more like an overdue truth. Your soulmate wanted to tell you immediately. But they respected your boundary. They did not use every new development as an excuse to pull you closer. They sent only a simple message. The process is moving forward. I am keeping my promise to handle it honestly. You read the message several times. You noticed the difference. In the past, they offered emotion without stability. Now they were offering proof without demanding attention. Something inside you began to trust them again. Slowly. Carefully. Not because the story sounded destined. Because their behavior was becoming consistent. Still, there was one final obstacle they had not expected. Someone from their family found the old photograph. And this person knew far more about the connection between your families than anyone else had revealed. They said the planned introduction had not simply disappeared because people lost contact. It had been stopped deliberately. Someone had opposed it. Someone believed that if you and your soulmate ever met, it would change both families in a way they were not prepared to accept. The reason had remained hidden for years. Now that reason was about to come into the open. And when your soulmate discovered who had prevented your paths from crossing the first time, they realized the marriage, the separation, and your unexpected meeting were connected to a secret much older than either of you knew. A secret that could explain why certain people were suddenly trying to keep you apart again.